Over the past 75 years, more than 10,000 chemicals have entered our food supply, but the EU allows just 300 additives. At Thrive Market, we prioritize quality, banning over 1,000 ingredients found in conventional grocery stores. Our Healthy Swap scanner helps you find better versions of your pantry essentials, without the junk, dyes, or fillers, and everything is delivered right to your doorstep. So shop at a grocery store that actually cares about your health at thrivemarket.com/getstarted for 30% off your first order and a free $60 gift. Over the past 75 years, more than 10,000 chemicals have entered our food supply, but the EU allows just 300 additives. At Thrive Market, we prioritize quality, banning over 1,000 ingredients found in conventional grocery stores. Our Healthy Swap scanner helps you find better versions of your pantry essentials, without the junk, dyes, or fillers, and everything is delivered right to your doorstep. So shop at a grocery store that actually cares about your health at thrivemarket.com/getstarted for 30% off your first order and a free $60 gift.
It's the Opperman Report. Join digital forensic investigator and PI Ed Opperman for an in-depth discussion of conspiracy theories, strategy of New World Order resistance, high-profile court cases in the news, and interviews with expert guests and authors on these topics and more. It's the Opperman Report. And now, here is investigator Ed Opperman.
Okay, welcome to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, private investigator Ed Opperman, and this show is brought to you by emailrevealer.com. Go to emailrevealer.com, you pick up a copy of my book, How to Succeed as a Private Investigator, and also to all different kinds of services we can offer you, private investigation services, digital forensics, computer forensics, email tracing, locates, asset searches, whatever you need, give me a call, and we'll get you out of trouble. If this is the first time you're hearing our show, check out OppermanReport.com, because we also have a members section where you can go there and sign up, become a member. We have special exclusive content that you won't find live on Friday nights or live on Saturday afternoons, but you'll find in the members section. So it's extra content that we provide for you for a membership subscription. Okay, today we have Harold Schechter. Okay, his website is haroldschechter.com. That's SCHECHTER, haroldschechter.com. Prolific author. How many books? My God. 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8. Over 10 books. Okay, the newest one is Maneater, right? Maneater, the life of a legend of an American cannibal. We were just discussing this 2 seconds ago. Okay, and already I'm losing my mind. Yes, Maneater is the latest book from haroldschechter.com. Prolific author. Harold, are you there?
I am, yep.
Okay, Harold, tell us a little bit about yourself.
Well, my day job is actually a professor of American literature at Queens College, one of the senior colleges of the City University of New York. I've been teaching there full time. Well, it's actually over 40 years now. I started in 1975. And about 25 years ago, I started writing historical true crime books. That's become really my area of specialization. And I guess what I'm best known for, and obviously the reason that you were kind enough to invite me onto your show.
Now, but your specialty is...
Yes. That's what it became. I began writing these books. I'm not a criminologist or a forensic psychiatrist. I really come to the writing of these books through my interest in storytelling and, why people need to hear and want to hear stories about monsters. And so the first book I wrote, Deviant, which was about Ed Gein, I guess I wrote it, over 25 years now. I had actually been writing a book about movies and discovered something I didn't know, and that really wasn't widely known at the time, which was that both Psycho and Texas Chainsaw Massacre, two of my favorite horror movies, and then later Silence of the Lambs, were all inspired by this actual case. and I began researching that case, and that became the basis of my first book. And that book was successful, and I was encouraged to keep writing in that genre. But again, I wasn't so much interested in serial killers per se as certain kinds of real-life killers whose crimes were so monstrous that they almost seemed like, and the public came to see them as these supernatural monsters. So.
Right. Now, what do you think attracts people to these stories? What is that?
Well, again, we have a fascination with horror and stories about monsters from the time we're children. I think these stories, monsters, again, not to get overly psychoanalytic about it, but in a general way, I think they embody different kinds of fears and forbidden desires and anxieties that we have, and by shaping them, into stories, it's a way of gaining some kind of sense of control over our own fears. So, but the appetite for horror, the appetite for stories of crime and violence and so on and so forth, it's not only a universal human trait, but again, in terms of people's lives, it really goes back to childhood. Hansel and Gretel, the first horror story most people hear, and it's totally terrifying. So.
Yeah, and even like some of those nursery rhymes, like "Ring Around the Rosie" and about the mouse going up the clock has to do with the plague, even when the one too about the guy, it's raining, it's snoring, he bumped his head. What is going on with that? We're groomed into this in a certain way from childhood.
Well, yeah, rockabye baby,
right?
When the bough breaks, the cradle will fall. But, again, the world is a very fearful place to children. And telling stories, again, about these things in a funny kind of way, I think helps people to manage their own fears and their anxieties. You're kind of calling up the monster in your imagination, but then you're telling a story about defeating the monster. So, and again, just shaping some of these anxieties into the form of a story gives you a sense of control over them. So, again, I'm sure there are various, obviously psychological reasons for our fascination with it. Another aspect is what certain psychiatrists call the shadow side of human nature. All of us have very dark aspects to our, that lurk behind our civilized selves. This is not to say that we're all potential murderers, but just that, there are socially dark, socially unacceptable impulses in each one of us. And this kind of material, I think, allows us to vicariously express and experience those things.
Okay, but now the guys you study and the guys you write about, these guys who actually step over that line and they become serial killers. Now, that's a unique kind of person, right? What do you think is behind that?
Well, there are different theories. In my own researches, and obviously other people have studied the subject, have come to similar conclusions. Most of those. Well, first of all, let's we need to establish that even though the phrase serial murder is of relatively recent vintage, the phenomenon that it refers to probably has existed as long as our species has. It just used to be called different things. Back in the early 20th century, they might call these people lust murderers, for example. And, that phrase lust murderers is meant to convey what is true of many very infamous serial killers, which is that they're really extreme sexual psychopaths who derive very sick erotic pleasure from inflicting pain and torture on helpless victims. So, then the question becomes, well, what goes into the making of criminals like that? One element that is often the case, not always, but often, is that they themselves were tortured in one way or another as children, physically, sexually, psychologically, one or the other, or all three sometimes. And so they grow up, feeling that the way you get pleasure in the world is by inflicting pain on others. There could be there probably are other factors involved. There's been more and more study about possible neurological factors and so on and so forth. Ultimately, it's a mystery that may or may not ever be solved. But certainly, again, a common denominator among many serial killers, is a monstrously abused childhood with a lot of humiliation involved. These are people who have been horribly humiliated from the time of their earliest years.
Well, give us an example. Ed Gein, was he humiliated as a child?
Well, yeah, two things. I mean, Gein is not, does not really, even though he's usually lumped into this class, and he did certainly apparently he definitely murdered two women, but Gein isn't a traditional lust murderer in the way, let's say, Ted Bundy or John Wayne Gacy or the Hillside Stranglers were. Gein was basically a necrophiliac. Gein was, even the two women that Gein killed, he basically executed very, very swiftly. He wasn't interested in inflicting pain and torture on them. He didn't derive sexual pleasure from that. He was just interested in getting their corpses back to his farmhouse so that he could, dissect them and so on. But that having been said, yes, I would say from what we know about Gein's childhood, that he underwent, a lot of humiliation. He had this kind of monstrously overbearing mother who was very demeaning and humiliating to him.
Now, so you think there's a sexual motivation for most of these guys? They get sexual pleasure from numerous murders.
Well, again, the definition of serial murder keeps changing. Some people define it this way, some people define it that way. But, it's if you look at the figures who, the term serial murder, I only discovered recently, was actually originally coined in the 1930s by a Berlin detective to describe a very, very, very notorious lust killer named Peter Kürten, who was going around horribly murdering and sexually torturing, men, women, and children, not to mention animals. In our own time, it really didn't come into common usage until the 1980s, when it was first used to describe the Atlanta child murderers. But if you think of the figures from the late 20th century, that we think of as serial killers, again, Gacy, Dahmer, Bundy, the Hillside Stranglers, and so on and so forth. Yeah, these are all sexual sadists. These are all people who derive, again, very, very twisted sexual pleasure. Another one would be Joel Rifkin, from torturing and murdering their victims, and often will achieve orgasm while doing that. So yeah, I mean, it's the classic serial killer. It's a sex crime.
Well, let me ask you this. Now, how come throughout recent history, anyway, we had all these almost cartoon characters, Son of Sam, the Zodiac, you had Atlanta child murderers. They became like famous, and they had all this publicity on TV, and Hillside Strangler, How come we don't have that anymore? The last one was Rifkin.
Yeah, that's a very interesting question. There certainly have been serial killers. Where I live, there's a whole series of unsolved serial murders at this Long Island beach, Gilroy Beach.
Right.
You still do read about these cases. There was one in Atlantic City a few years ago, where, a string of prostitutes, their bodies will go up. It is true that there was that period there where you did have these kinds of very larger than life serial murders. I'm not entirely sure why that is, and I've given that some thought. To some extent, and again, this is just pure speculation, I think something in the culture of the 1970s and so on and so forth released the very, very, violent, extreme sexual stuff. If you have a philosophy which started to take hold in the late 1960s, if it feels good, do it. That could also, inspire, people like, these serial killers who, like, what feels good to them is killing and torturing people. But there's another factor involved, which is, it's very possible there still may be as many serial killers at large now as there were 20 or 30 years ago, which thankfully is not a huge number. What's interesting, though, is we're no longer really, the culture is no longer really so fascinated and obsessed by serial murder. I've studied American crime going back to the 19th century. And one thing that's always struck me is each period seems to have its own signature crime. That is, a certain kind of crime that the culture becomes very obsessed by, because that kind of crime seems to crystallize a lot of anxiety of the moment. So that, for example, back in the late 1800s, the 1890s, and into the early 20th century, Americans were very obsessed with poison murder. And every time there was a poison murder or an apparent poison murder, it would become this huge national story. Some of them, became these sensational kind of trials of the century and so on. And I think it was a reflection, among other things, of the fact that so many Americans, were really terrified about the fact that every time they took some medicine or ate certain kinds of food, they might die because, there was no federal regulation. Being sickened or poisoned by something you ate was a very real possibility for a lot of people. And somehow the poisoner, came to embody that fear, that nightmare. Back in the 30s, it was, before the 30s, 1920s, the case of Leopold and Loeb. They kidnapped and murdered this one adolescent. There were many other crimes that were at least as heinous, if not more heinous, going on at the time. But that crime really gripped the attention of the nation, because Leopold and Loeb, again, seemed to be the incarnation of this cultural anxiety, what they call the flaming youth, the youth gone wild. Back in the 80s, it was a serial killer. Now, we've become less obsessed with serial murder. The serial murder has been, I think, replaced in our imaginations with the mass murderer. The person who goes into a workplace and shoots up a whole bunch of people, or a school and shoots up a whole bunch of people. And I think that's a reflection of our, current anxiety, which is obviously the fear of terrorism. I think since 9/11, the mass murderer has replaced the serial murderer as the great boogeyman of the American imagination.
I was going to bring up the school shooting. It's in my notes. I was just about to say the same thing. Now, you mentioned how, like, in the 60s, late 60s and early 70s, there was this free love kind of do as thou wilt, right? The old Aleister Crowley thing.
Yeah.
Now, have you noticed any connection between all these serial killers and all this kind of stuff with satanic cults and a belief in Satanism? Because there is that cannibalism. There seems to be a thread.
So, I think there was that whole Satanism hysteria that was going on back in I guess it was precipitated, by things like The Exorcist and Rosemary's Baby. But, there was that moment, where there were all these rumors of Satan cults, these people connected with Satan cults. Every now and then, like the Night Stalker, you might get a guy who'll, paint a pentagram in blood, at the crime scene, but that's just whatever. I don't think there's any genuine Satan worship going on there. So no, I personally do not believe that. And certainly none of the serial murders, I've ever looked at or studied, the notorious ones, Ed Kemper, for example, again, or the ones I've already mentioned, Gacy, Bundy, they had no connection to that and didn't really have anything to do with what motivated them.
One of your books covers Bundy?
Well, only, I've done I did this book, A to Z Encyclopedia of Serial Killer, and the Serial Killer Files. I discuss both of them, but no, the individual, the books that deal with individual serial murder cases.
Gotcha.
Those, the Gein book, really, that's the most recent case that I cover. The others go back to really 1870s. Yeah.
Well, no, but then again, a thread through your books is the cannibalism. Now,
well, no, that's no. I wrote I believe that the second book I wrote was about Albert Fish, who was a cannibal, and my most recent book is about a cannibal, but not a serial killer. The recent book is about Alfred Packer, who was it's kind of a legendary figure out west, but that's a case of survival cannibalism. It wasn't. He was not a serial murderer. He was ultimately tried and convicted of killing 5 of his companions, who were all stranded in the wilderness. So, in that sense, he was, or at least convicted of being. He always denied that he did it, a mass murderer. But no, I don't think there's any cannibalism in any of the other books.
Okay, so you're describing Man-Eater, the life and legend of an American cannibal.
Correct.
Well, give us an idea. What is that story? Because I only read about it briefly, that this guy was traveling across country, then he wound up eating all his friends, I guess, right? So give us an idea what really happened there.
Well, it happened back in 1873. Packer, again, who is a kind of a legendary figure out in Colorado. I taught for a year at the University of Colorado in Boulder, and the student cafeteria is named the Alfred Packer Memorial Cafe. But Packer was a prospector who went with a group of other prospectors into the San Juan Mountains of Colorado. There was a big silver boom at the time, and he and 5 of his companions got lost in the snow, and he emerged several months later, looking unusually well-fed man who had just spent several months snowbound in the wilderness. And they subsequently found corpses of these other men, all of whom had been killed and cannibalized. And Packer never denied that he had lived off their flesh. But he did deny that he did insist that he had not murdered them. He claimed that one of the other guys, that he had been away doing some scouting to see if he could find this Indian agency that was nearby. And while he was gone, one of the other men had murdered his 4 buddies. And when Packer returned, this other man was sitting by the campfire roasting a piece of human flesh, And then he attacked Packer, and Packer killed him in self-defense. So, and then Packer, again, who was stuck in the wilderness for another 2 months, just a little camp and lived off the flesh of these guys. So Packer again denied the cannibalism, and the cannibalism was not even technically a crime, and he claimed he had murdered this one guy in self-defense, but he denied that he'd killed all 5 people. But that claim was, judged to be a lie. And he was, again, convicted and sentenced to death for the murder of these people. That sentence was commuted on a legal technicality. He was retried, convicted of 5 counts of manslaughter, spent about 20 years in prison, and was ultimately paroled. So that's the story in a nutshell. But he, as I said, he became a kind of folk figure out west.
And they named the school cafeteria after him? That's a little disturbing, don't you think?
Well, it's weird. He's one of these figures, who somewhere along the line, went from being this detested criminal. Even at the end of his life, there were people, who started to believe the story that he had murdered these other guys. He was sort of seen as some relic of the rugged Old West. Somewhere along the line, he sort of turned into a semi-humorous figure. Actually, guys who do South Park, Matt Stone and Trey Parker, they were students at University of Colorado. They did a very amusing movie about Packer called Cannibal Musical, which is like a deranged Oklahoma or something like that. But so it's part of the sick humor that has grown up around the Alfred Packer legend.
And maybe your next book could be a cookbook, right? Recipes.
So they have an Alfred Packer book. So.
They have an Alfred Packer recipe book?
Yep.
Oh, my God. Now, that's not funny. Okay. Now, this is sort of similar to the story of the Donner Party, right?
Yeah, very similar. In fact, Packer, at one point was complaining because, the Donner, for the most part, the survivors of the Donner Party, were, kind of accepted back into society. And he was complaining that, people were calling him this human hyena and this man-eater, and he hadn't done anything the Donners hadn't done, and so on. But yeah, it's the Donner Party and the Packer case are really the two most infamous cases of survival cannibalism in the American West.
Now, I'm noticing here on your list here as well that you looked into female serial killers as well.
Correct.
Which it's not as common.
Well, again, it depends on how you define serial murder. One of the arguments I make in that book is the book Fatal, which was about a woman named Jane Toppin, who was a private nurse who ultimately confessed to 31 murders. There was a time, actually, before John Wayne Gacy's crime, the Guinness Book of World Records had her listed as America's most prolific serial killer. So, again, when we think of serial murder, obviously we think of, the guys, and somebody like Jack the Ripper, let's say. The Ripper is first modern serial killer. Again, also, obviously, a sexually lust killer. So when people think of serial killers, they think of that. But my argument in my book is that's just the male form of serial murder. And women do not engage in that kind of, sexual mutilation murder. That is particularly male, aggressive kind of crime. But there are many, many, many female killers. They just commit their crimes differently. They tend to be poisoners, as Jane Toppin was. Again, I think among other things, it reflects differences in male-female sexuality. But Jane Toppin was also a sexual sadist. There's a kind of arsenic and old lace image of these women poisoners. It seems like some quaint, sort of crime where you just slip some poison into, somebody's tea or something. But Toppin was she was arguably sexual sadist of an even worse kind than somebody like Jack the Ripper. Jack the Ripper killed his victims very, very quickly. He would slit their throats. All the atrocities he perpetrated on bodies were done post-mortem. But somebody like Jane Toppin would derive this very, very sick sexual pleasure from, administering these poisons slowly over the course of days and even weeks to her victims. And, making them horrendous. These people suffered horrible, tortures. And then finally, when she died and she wanted them to die, she would give them a fatal dosage. And she would, by her own admission, she would get into bed with them while they were dying and embrace them and have an orgasm as they were dying. So, she very much, again, it's a serial murder of a terrifyingly sadistic stripe. But again, just going about it differently than the way men do.
And it seems that a lot of the female ones are like nurses and stuff like that.
Mm-hmm. Well, yes, although some of the most, very, very infamous female serial murderers in America of the late 19th century were not nurses. They were just housewives and mothers, who ended up killing assorted husbands and children. That's another difference I found between male and female serial murders, which is and again, I think it reflects something about the difference in male and female sexual behavior. Male serial killers generally tend to prey on strangers, whereas female serial murderers tend to kill intimates. They will kill family members. They'll kill husbands. They'll kill close friends. Yeah.
Very interesting. And also too, female pedophiles also too will usually very, very young victims, and victims that they're like in charge of, like they're a teacher or they're a babysitter or something like that, or even nurses again.
Yeah.
Okay, this is a good time to take a commercial break. We're here with Harold Schechter. His website is haroldschechter.com. Now, that's spelled SCHECHTER.com. American true crime writer. Has written many, many books. We'll be right back after the latest one is called Man-Eater, The Life and Legend of an American Cannibal. We'll be right back with more of Harold Schechter right after these messages. And now, a word from our sponsors. Pacific West Bamboo, your premier source for sustainable building material. They provide construction-grade and craft-grade bamboo material for all your indoor, outdoor, and gardening needs. Contact them for event planning and display building as well. 503-839-8126. Or you go to their new website, pacificwestbamboo.com. Or you can contact them on Facebook at Pacific West Bamboo. That's 503-839-8126. Amanda from Pacific West Bamboo was our first sponsor. She's been so good to us, so please support her in return. I want to make everybody aware of our new members section at www.oppermanreport.com. You can go there and sign up for a monthly, quarterly, or yearly subscription. You can even purchase episodes one by one. You get full access to brand new original content, new guests, new uncensored interviews, my own investigations and reports, and we're going to be adding sections with documents, images, police reports, either provided by myself or by my guests, or for my own investigations, my own reports. So you can go to oppermanreport.com and you can sign up there tonight. You can start listening tonight. Strawman. I want to mention Strawman. Strawman is a band out of Toronto, Canada. They're good friends of the Opperman Report. They're a trio of guys who share the same mindset most of us here do, and they put that energy into their words and music. So check them out at strawmanmusic.com and drop them a line to let them know that you heard them here on the Opperman Report. We'll be doing an interview with Sean Duffy soon. You can get an autographed copy of my book, How to Succeed as a Private Investigator, by visiting my PI website, emailrevealer.com. We also offer a computer and cell phone forensics. We can recover deleted text messages to uncover infidelity. We offer asset searches, locates, email tracing, background reports, and we can even trace your spouse's email address back to internet dating websites to catch them cheating online. You can reach us at 800-572-9762, or you can email me at emailrevealer@aol.com. New World Mexican Women. Everyone loves the New World Mexican Women, and their line of fine, handcrafted, authentic Mexican jewelry of stone mosaic and abalane stone inlay. In their first book, titled New World Mexican Women, available on lulu.com, they teach you how to make this jewelry, and they have a collection of love letters to their men from their hometown that have immigrated to the United States to find work. They have also published a new book entitled Azuquina to the Rodeo. It's about a young girl that falls in love with a rodeo bull rider, and she runs away with him without telling her family. You can find the New World Mexican Women by Googling New World Mexican Women. And you can ask them about their deals on wholesaling their fine jewelry and all of the other projects that they have going on. If you'd like to have your business or website advertised here and promoted all over the world on dozens of stations every day, give us a call at 800-572-9762 or email oppermanreport@gmail.com. And now back to our show. Well, not so soon. First, we're going to talk about MichiganMushrooms.net. They offer the highest quality chaga chunks available anywhere, picked fresh from healthy live trees in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, sun-dried and quickly shipped to you. They're very proud of their long-standing reputation as trusted farmers and collectors of wild, gourmet, and medicinal mushrooms. Customer service and offering high-quality products is very important to them. And they have a strict grading system that begins in the woods, and they would rather pass up a chunk that looks bad instead of passing it off to you, the customer. Additionally, they are recognized by the state of Michigan as mushroom experts. They are certified by the Department of Agriculture to sell 20 different species of mushrooms, and proof of this certification is available upon request. That is MichiganMushrooms.net or on Facebook, Michigan Mushrooms LLC. Got a brand new sponsor, The Rodeo of Doom by Miguel La Sala. The year is 2384, and Henry Fields is a down-on-his-luck adjunct professor in the architecture department at Andreas Tangen University in Los Angeles. But he has one thing going for him that others don't. He has enough of the coveted EP14 to live to be 200 if he wants to. Not that hard. When he saves a woman for certain death with a few drops of the EP14, a corrupt government agency tries to blackmail him into selling off his supply. Just when it seems like it might be a good idea, all hell breaks loose. The Rodeo of Doom was written by Miguel La Sala and edited by Margaret A. Harrell, the author of Keep This Quiet, memoir series. Now, she was also the copy-edited Hunter S. Thompson's breakthrough book, Hell's Angels. According to Harrell, the Rodeo of Doom will grip you and pull you into the wild ride of a different reality. This is a consciously fast-paced journey into the future. Author Miguel La Sala reveals his craft by intricately weaving in fine details for his reader and keeps you anxiously anticipating what will happen next. Do not wait to read this book. There will surely be more to come from this author. The Rodeo of Doom is available on Amazon.com, and there's a link to the Rodeo of Doom in the Opperman Report bookstore. Okay, welcome back to the Opperman Report. I'm your host, Private Investigator Ed Opperman, and we're here today with the true crime author Harold Schechter. And you can find his website at haroldschechter.com, ECHTER.com. Also, to all his books will be available in the Opperman Report bookstore on OppermanReport.com. So, Harold, are you there?
Yep, I'm here.
Okay, now, there was a couple I wanted to talk about. Oh, yeah, America's youngest serial killer, Fiend. The shocking true story of America's youngest serial killer. What's the story with that?
He was, this took place in Boston. This is also in the 1870s, around 1871, not too long after the end of the Civil War. His name was Jesse Harding Pomeroy. Again, a classic, what used to be called lust murderer, who, we have limited amount of information about his childhood, but he seemed to have been subjected to very frequent and severe physical punishment by his father. His parents were actually divorced, which was quite unusual at the time. And Jesse also had this one eye had some kind of strange white film over it. So he was also constantly the butt of a lot of, cruel teasing growing up. But anyway, when he was around 12, he began luring young boys in South Boston to these remote places and torturing them. He would bind them up and beat them with a belt, and his acts became increasingly severe. By the time they finally caught him, he was taking his penknife and slicing up the kids' faces and threatening to and cutting their penises. Anyway, there was this whole string of these attacks. The newspapers kept talking about this boy fiend. They finally arrested him. One of his victims identified him. He was arrested, put into a reform school where he was kind of a model inmate, and his mother persuaded the governor to commute his sentence, and he was released after 18 months, and almost immediately committed two horrible sexual mutilation murders, one on little boy, one on little girl. And he was captured very quickly and at first sentenced to be hanged, but he was only 13 at the time, and that caused a big uproar among the populace of Boston. They felt it was very uncivilized to execute somebody so young. So he was given a sentence of life without the possibility of parole in solitary confinement. He ended up spending over 40 years in solitary confinement. It was, up until recently, it was the second longest stretch of any prisoner in solitary confinement after Robert Stroud, the famous Birdman of Alcatraz. And that's a story in a nutshell.
Imagine that, 13 years old, and you get thrown in solitary confinement for the next, what was it, 40 years, you said?
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
Oh, yeah. My God. Did anybody ever interview him or talk to him at the end of that stretch?
Yeah, well, he was finally, after 40 years, released from solitary and put in a general prison population. And by then, he was always something of a celebrity. But when they finally released him from solitary, it was news in Boston. They transferred him actually from the prison that he had spent 40 years in to a different facility. There were all these stories, comparing him to Rip Van Winkle. I mean, when he had gone into prison, it was like 1880 something. When he got out, it was the late 1920s. The world obviously changed quite dramatically in the course of that time. He had never seen a car, let alone ridden one. He'd never seen an airplane. He had never heard the radio or anything. So, there was a lot of interest in him when he was got out of solitary when he made this trip by car from one prison to another.
So they let him out of solitary, but they never actually let him out of prison.
No, he died in prison. But yes, he was eventually let out of solitary. I mean, there were people who, really then, that he had been subjected to this incredible torture. So.
Yeah, could you imagine? Okay, 13 years old. Oh my God. Okay, the Mad Sculptor. Mm-hmm. The Maniac, the Model, and the Murder That Shook the Nation. Now, this is a recent book, just 2014. What's this one about?
Well, that was about a very notorious triple murder. One of the things I'm interested in as a writer is the fact that kind of periodically, there'll be these crimes that are huge nationwide sensations at the time, but that fade from public memory. And then there are other crimes that obviously just enter into cultural mythology and become sort of an undying part of it, like the Lizzie Borden case.
Right.
The Mad Sculptor is about a crime that was a nationwide sensation back in 1937. This young man named Robert Irwin, who was a very talented sculptor, murdered 3 people in New York City on Manhattan's East Side on Easter Sunday, 1937. These members of a family that he was very close to and had actually boarded with for a while. He killed one of the victims, this very, very beautiful young woman named Ronnie Gedman, who had been a model for various true crime pulp magazines, True Detective, and so on and so forth. So there were all these photographs of her that had been taken in which she was either partially dressed, in some cases totally nude. So, it had all these, and of course, this is the heyday of tabloid journalism. So there are all these elements that made this crime very, very sensational. There was this beautiful, supposedly sexually promiscuous young woman who was the victim. There were the circumstances of the discovery of the crime. She was found naked on a bed. Her mother, whom Irwin also killed, strangled her with bare hands, was shoved under the bed that her daughter's naked body was found on top of. Then there was a third victim who was a boarder who had been stabbed to death with an ice pick. Anyway, very, very sensational triple murder. It also happened in a very, very fashionable neighborhood, a place called Beekman Place on the east side of New York. And there was Irwin himself. He was he was obviously quite crazy, but he was also sort of a brilliant young man who was a very talented sculptor and was the son of some well-known religious zealots, really. So it just had all these tabloid-ready ingredients that made it a huge, huge case back in 1937. Irwin managed to elude this massive manhunt in New York and make his way ultimately to Chicago, where he turned himself in. The case became, he was defended by a very famous lawyer named Samuel Leibowitz, who at that time was also defending the Scottsboro boys, which was one of the most famous civil rights cases of the 20th century. So, so that was the case of the Mad Sculptor. When I'm looking around for something to write about, I try to find stories that have interesting characters, and again, have interesting stories. It's not just about the gruesomeness of the crime. There are many all too many horrible and gruesome crimes that take place all the time, but they don't make for particularly interesting stories. So,
now, do you think he sought out the model? Do you think he sought her out because he saw her on these true crime magazines?
No. He had actually boarded with the family, and he was friends with the model. He was friends with the whole family. And he was actually obsessed with Ronnie, that was his name, model. He was actually obsessed with Ronnie's sister. He had hoping the sister would marry him. I mean, it's a kind of a complicated story, but to give the short version, Irwin, again, who was psychotic, really. I mean, he could seem very, very lucid for periods of time, but fundamentally, he was quite mad. He had actually, several years earlier, while boarding with the Gedeon family, he had attempted to slice off his own penis.
Oh, my God.
Because he believed that by somehow killing off his sexual energy, it would sort of channel all that sexual energy would be channeled into his art. So he tried very, very seriously, actually, to slice off his penis, and he ended up in Bellevue Hospital being treated by a very, very famous New York psychiatrist named Frederick Wortham. But before slicing off his penis, he had become obsessed with this other Gedeon sister, and she was the one. Well, anyway, he ultimately decided several years later, when she refused to marry him, that he was going to kill her. And he showed up at the Gedeon house intending to kill the sister, but the sister wasn't there. So he ended up killing the mother, and then ended up killing Veronica, and then ended up killing the boarder. So,
okay, so this guy was going to slice his penis off because he was a sculptor.
Yes.
Have you seen this art? Was it worth anything?
Said, actually, I actually own a piece of his art.
Oh my God, really? Oh, this must be some pretty good art then. What is the art good?
Yeah, it's pretty good. Well, I mean, what happened was that after my book came out, I was contacted by a woman, a very lovely elderly woman who lives down in Alabama, who told me that, she had seen my book or read about my book, and that her ex-husband's father, her father-in-law, had actually worked in a mental institution where Bob Irwin was an inmate. And Irwin, who had been institutionalized for quite a number of years, would make these different art objects and sell them to the doctors and the nurses and the orderlies. And this woman's father-in-law had purchased this very beautiful hand-carved wooden box that had been mas by Bob Irwin. What was really kind of amazing about it is on the cover of the box, there's a bas-relief sculptor of Ronnie Gedeon posing nude, because she used to pose nude for Bob when he was a boarder. And anyway, I ended up purchasing this item from this woman. So.
Okay, very interesting. Now, and that's going to bring me to another question I was going to ask you, is that because a lot of these stories you seem to research are old, they're historic. Now, you can't really interview people that were first-hand witnesses and stuff like that. So what do you do? You find the court transcripts? What do you do?
Yeah, you can find a lot of material, old newspapers, transcripts, psychiatric reports, so on. But, I am sometimes able, obviously, not to. Well, with the Gein book, I went to Plainfield, and I did interview people who knew Gein. I'm often, with another book I wrote called The Devil's Gentleman, I was able to track down family members, descendants of the murderer's family, many of whom, have kind of interesting family stories to tell. Some of them have, documents. They have letters or journals and things like that. I try to accumulate as much material as I possibly can. Sometimes I'm working on a book now about a murder that happened in Indiana back in 1908. A bunch of murders. And, I went to the town, and they have a historical society. with all kinds of information. I'll often hire a researcher to help me in various ways. I end up accumulating literally thousands of pages of documents before I start writing the book. So,
gotcha. Now this book here, Psycho USA, famous American killers you never heard of. Give us some good ones.
Well, again, I'm very interested in why certain crimes, become immortalized in our culture, and other equally heinous crimes, which at the time of their commission, might have, become nationwide sensations, are so quickly forgotten. So, and some of these cases are ones I always thought, wow, I'd maybe really at some point like to write a book about this, but I realized that I was never going to live long enough to write a book about each one of them. So I decided to just write sort of short accounts of each one of these. Some of them were these female poisoners that I mentioned before. There was one called Lydia Sherman, one called Sarah Jane Robinson. These were two women back in the 1870s who murdered about a dozen family members, husbands and children and siblings sometimes. One case I was very interested in, there was a very notorious axe murder that happened in the late 1800s. It was actually the most sensational American axe murder before the Lizzie Borden case. It happened. There's a little cluster of islands that are between off the Maine, New Hampshire coast. One of the islands is called Smutty Nose, and the Isles, this little archipelago, really, it's called the Isles of Shoals. And there was a family of Norwegian, these Norwegian fishermen and their wives and sister-in-laws living on this island, and they were and when the men were away on this fishing trip, one of their former employees named Louis Wagner rowed out to this little rowed, R-O-W-E-D, out to this little isle, and and murdered two of the women. The third woman escaped, and it was called the Smutty Nose Horror. A very, 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 very sensational case at the time. It was also written, coincidentally, there was a famous American poet named Celia Thaxter, whose family owned a hotel on the adjacent little island. And she ended up writing a very famous early true crime story about the case. So, and then there are some forgotten serial murders. There was a guy named Joseph LePage, who was called the French Monster, who committed these horrible sexual mutilation murders on a couple of women, also in New England. So the book has, I can't remember exactly how many, but there are probably 30 or so cases that I recreate in this book of long forgotten, notorious, mostly serial killers.
Harold, we're getting toward the end of the show. What do you want to leave us with, and how can people find you and stuff like that?
Well, let's see. What do I want to leave you with? Well, I guess one thing that, fascinates me is, a lot of people think, especially nowadays with all this fascination with, the podcasts and, my dog's barking, programs like Netflix making it for, right. The cable TV shows, true crime is a very, very recent thing. One thing that is important to keep in mind is that people have always had an appetite for true crime stories. The oldest true crime book that I'm aware of was published around Shakespeare's time. So, there's, again, something about reading about these cases that is important to our imaginations and even, in a way, to our psychological stability. Because, I think both as individuals and as a society, civilized, moral people need some socially acceptable outlet for their darker impulses, and that reading true crime, provides a suitable outlet for that.
Okay. And how can people get a hold of you? If they want to confess or something. Let's say I want to confess to you. I'm a serial killer.
Well, I do have a Facebook page, which I actually never go on, but somebody monitors it for me. And when people contact me on it, I get back to them.
Okay, great. Harold Schechter, haroldschechter.com. Thank you so much, my friend.
Okay, thank you.
Good night. Okay, then we had Harold Schechter from the website haroldschechter.com. Serial killers, cannibals, all kind of interesting stuff that the Opera Report just loves to talk about. Let's take a little commercial break here. We'll be right back after these messages. And now a word from our sponsors. Pacific West Bamboo, your premier source for sustainable building material. They provide construction-grade and craft-grade bamboo material for all your indoor, outdoor, and gardening needs. Contact them for event planning and display building as well. 503-839-8126. Or you go to their new website, pacificwestbamboo.com. Or you can contact them on Facebook at Pacific West Bamboo. That's 503-839-8126. Amanda from Pacific West Bamboo was our first sponsor. She's been so good to us, so please support her in return. I want to make everybody aware of our new members section at www.oppermanreport.com. You can go there and sign up for a monthly, quarterly, or yearly subscription. You can even purchase episodes one by one. You get full access to brand new original content, new guests, new uncensored interviews, my own investigations and reports, and we're going to be adding sections with documents, images, police reports, either provided by myself or by my guests, or for my own investigations, my own reports. So you can go to oppermanreport.com and you can sign up there tonight. You can start listening tonight. Strawman. I want to mention Strawman. Strawman is a band out of Toronto, Canada. They're good friends of the Opperman Report. They're a trio of guys who share the same mindset most of us here do, and they put that energy into their words and music. So check them out at strawmanmusic.com and drop them a line to let them know that you heard them here on the Opperman Report. We'll be doing an interview with Sean Duffy soon. You can get an autographed copy of my book, How to Succeed as a Private Investigator, by visiting my PI website, emailrevealer.com. We also offer a computer and cell phone forensics. We can recover deleted text messages to uncover infidelity. We offer asset searches, locates, email tracing, background reports, and we can even trace your spouse's email address back to internet dating websites to catch them cheating online. You can reach us at 800-572-9762, or you can email me at emailrevealer@aol.com. New World Mexican Women. Everyone loves the New World Mexican Women, and their line of fine, handcrafted, authentic Mexican jewelry of stone mosaic and abalone stone inlay. In their first book, titled New World Mexican Women, available on lulu.com, they teach you how to make this jewelry, and they have a collection of love letters to their men from their hometown that have immigrated to the United States to find work. They have also published a new book entitled Azuquina to the Rodeo. It's about a young girl that falls in love with a rodeo bull rider, and she runs away with him without telling her family. You can find the New World Mexican Women by Googling New World Mexican Women. And you can ask them about their deals on wholesaling their fine jewelry and all of the other projects that they have going on. If you'd like to have your business or website advertised here and promoted all over the world on dozens of stations every day, give us a call at 800-572-9762 or email oppermanreport@gmail.com. And now back to our show. Well, not so soon. First, we're going to talk about MichiganMushrooms.net. They offer the highest quality chaga chunks available anywhere, picked fresh from healthy live trees in Michigan's Upper Peninsula, sun-dried and quickly shipped to you. They're very proud of their long-standing reputation as trusted farmers and collectors of wild, gourmet, and medicinal mushrooms. Customer service and offering high-quality products is very important to them. And they have a strict grading system that begins in the woods, and they would rather pass up a chunk that looks bad instead of passing it off to you, the customer. Additionally, they are recognized by the state of Michigan as mushroom experts. They are certified by the Department of Agriculture to sell 20 different species of mushrooms, and proof of this certification is available upon request. That is MichiganMushrooms.net or on Facebook, Michigan Mushrooms LLC. Got a brand new sponsor, The Rodeo of Doom by Miguel La Sala. The year is 2384, and Henry Fields is a down-on-his-luck adjunct professor in the architecture department at Andreas Tangen University in Los Angeles. But he has one thing going for him that others don't. He has enough of the coveted EP14 to live to be 200, if he wants to. Not that hard. When he saves a woman for certain death with a few drops of the EP14, a corrupt government agency tries to blackmail him into selling off his supply. Just when it seems like it might be a good idea, all hell breaks loose. The Rodeo of Doom was written by Miguel La Sala and edited by Margaret A. Harrell, the author of Keep This Quiet, memoir series. Now, she was also the copy-edited Hunter S. Thompson's breakthrough book, Hell's Angels. According to Harrell, the Rodeo of Doom will grip you and pull you into the wild ride of a different reality. This is a consciously fast-paced journey into the future. Author Miguel La Sala reveals his craft by intricately weaving in fine details for his reader and keeps you anxiously anticipating what will happen next. Do not wait to read this book. There will surely be more to come from this author. The Rodeo of Doom is available on Amazon.com, and there's a link to the Rodeo of Doom in the Opperman Report bookstore.